about the very, very hot topic of AI for content authoring.
Well, AI is certainly the hot topic. I don't know about AI for content authoring, but here we are. Um, can you see all that?
Yes.
You're good to go? All right, thanks. And thanks for having me here today. As oh, there you are. As mentioned, my name is Greg Dunlap, and there's all the stuff that Paula just told you about me. And yes, I wrote this book, Designing Content Authoring Experiences, last year. And many people in this room supported that book and allowed it to come into existence through the Kickstarter that I ran to publish it. So I'm grateful, am greatly appreciative for that. And it's interesting that you're having a topic coming up about how content designers need to become more technical, because this is going to be a bit of a more probably technical talk than most of the ones that come through Content Strategy Seattle. But I've always felt that there's some benefits to content strategists and content designers becoming more technical. I once pitched a workshop to Confab called Nerdy Shit for Content Strategists, that they never actually took, which is too bad because I think it's something that's well needed. But this is going to be a slightly more technical talk, I think. So, um, but anyways, back to the book. One of the ideas I had when I wrote this book was that I was seeing a lot of discourse in the CMS world that was very much like about things that didn't relate back to the clients that I was working with, because the clients I was working with weren't worried about personalization or orchestration or even AI, because they were mostly so immature from a content standpoint that they were failing at the like most basic elements of launching a successful site. Like they were not set up for success from an organizational or government standpoint at all. And so all of this other stuff that was being talked about in the CMS world, it's like it's interesting, but it didn't relate back to what I was seeing on the ground. And so this book is very approachable, and it's very geared towards very basic use cases. It spends a lot of time not even talking about like content management systems at all, but about research and understanding your users, and goes back to really basic principles. And so if that sounds very interesting to you, I'd encourage you to check it out. My website is authoringexperience.com, and you can I'll have that at the end as well. So I like to start a lot of my presentations with this quote, and I'm sure that many of you have seen me use it before. But in my experience, the number one complaint of organizations looking to replace their CMS is simply that our editors hate it. And that is a quote from a guy named Dean Barker in his book, Real World Content Modeling. But what I've always argued is that people don't hate their CMS. They hate that their CMS was not designed with their needs and use cases in mind. And that's really important, because when you spend all this time and energy building an enterprise CMS, you want people to actually engage with it. I was at a conference recently where somebody said that their editors do 6,000 to 9,000 edits a week. And that is a lot of people doing a lot of work in your editorial tools. And if they're like filled with dread every time that they log in and try to use them, then they won't, unless it's absolutely necessary. And then once they're in, they'll try to get out as quickly as humanly possible. And that's kind of like why I wrote this book, and I've been talking on this topic, because authoring is important. You're not going to get good content out of people who don't want to use your content management system. And so a good authoring experience prevents people from being miserable, and it's good business. Win-win. So this talk, though, is about AI. And historically, until recently, I've been kind of a skeptic about AI, especially in the realm of content authoring. Everything I was seeing was focusing on generating content faster to sort of feed the maw of consumption and SEO more efficiently. And that is just not a use case that excites me at all. However, in the last 6 months or so, I've started to come around, and I've seen some ways that AI can be used as a tool to enhance content production rather than replace it. And that's what I'm really going to focus on in this talk. That said, there's something I really want to kind of get into first, and it might seem like a tangent, but it's really not, or maybe it is, and I just want an excuse to have a little rant, and if so, then I'm sorry about that. But I think I'll tie it all back together at the end. So, right. So in the last 25 years, some really interesting things have been happening on the web. And I'm going to point some of them out. So in 1997, the term SEO was coined to discuss the practice of search engine optimization, aka trying to get your sites better ranked on Google. Then in 1999, WCAG 1.0 was released, and this was the first ever accessibility guidelines for web content. Jumping forward to 2010, Ethan Marcotte wrote an article for Listapart introducing the term responsive web design to describe new techniques that allowed content to respond to different screen formats. And then in 2012, Google introduced its knowledge graph, a way that content could be described so that Google can, do the thing where if you have a location or a restaurant, it can show all the descriptive stuff in its search results or in that sidebar on the side. You can define what your web page is describing so that it can then display stuff related to what you are describing. So what do all of these things have in common? They introduced and expanded a new audience for the web, and that audience is other computers. SEO is fundamentally about your website telling a search bot what content is on your site and what it's about. Accessibility requires assistive technology to interpret your content based on the metadata that's provided to it. Responsive design is about describing your content in such a way that your CMS and browser can rearrange it meaningfully depending on the device that's viewing it. And the knowledge graph requires that your site describe itself in a specific format that Google and other search engines can understand and interpret for display. And when Amit Singhal wrote the blog post introducing the knowledge graph for Google, he titled it Things Not Strings, underlining this idea that machines need context that is not explicit in the text. And this is a tension that's kind of been simmering under a lot of web design and development for almost 2 decades now, and which many organizations have dealt with really poorly, honestly. AI is just another extension of this same problem. A machine needs to read some content. However, instead of removing the need for context, AI actually amplifies it. The knowledge graph requires that you define what something is in order for it to be displayed properly. And AI needs to know what something is in order to generate meaningful information about it. But it's gone beyond that, where it's actually making decisions for you and acting on your behalf. If your AI is generating content and designing your digital properties from scratch, then it needs much more context than most people are providing it in the systems they're building right now. And what I hear is a lot of people saying, oh, we'll just throw all of this existing content at AI and it will solve all of our problems. And the reality is that actually, without a ton of context about the who, what, when, and why of that content, then the how has the potential to be much, much worse than if you had never used AI at all. So here's an example. Something a lot of organizations do is they create marketing landing pages. And these might be focused specifically on a product or maybe a seasonal campaign or a vertical you're targeting or whatever. And the basic composition of these pages is usually some introductory text followed by some focused links to content on the site which will support your message. A high-profile case study, a white paper, some statistics, comparisons to the competition, and some calls to action. And these pages typically take a great deal of work and planning to set up, and they're usually just put together in what we've all heard termed as the sales funnel, where they lead sort of into each other and the content drives people down the sales pipeline. And because of that, a lot of CMS companies are offering support to have AI build these pages for you. And that sounds great, and I'm sure that the pages it creates will be very pretty. However, without context, these pages will not meet an organization's needs, and that will happen in 2 ways. So typically when we talk about things like responsive design or accessibility, the context we want to provide takes the form of structure. We want to create content types that serve specific purposes and provide metadata on those content types, which provide the context of what the different pieces of content are. So in the example of our marketing page, If AI is going to go and collect all the content needed to create this page, it's going to need to know what is a case study and what is a product profile and what is our comparison chart. And if all of your content is dumped into the body field in WordPress posts, then the AI will have no idea whether something is an event or a press release or a case study or whatever. It can try to figure it out based on the text, and it will, but it will often fail or make mistakes and grab the wrong thing. But this isn't just a problem in that generic WordPress example, because I've also seen lots of so-called structured or composable systems whose components are things like promo card with a photo or two-column layout. And that's just as bad because they only describe how something looks, not what it is. That promo card could literally be anything. So how is the AI supposed to make smart decisions about the kind of content it is pulling in to communicate with a customer if it doesn't actually know? So using structure to communicate semantic meaning is still just as, if not more important than ever. But there's another angle at play here too, because a landing page is designed to achieve some goal or purpose, and the AI needs that information too. So the context for AI is not just structural, it's also strategic. What are we selling? What are our goals for this page? Who are our customers? What are their needs? How do we plan to move people through the funnel? And what does success look like? Now, in the past, we've used simple things like taxonomy to tie different pieces of content together on a theme and then pull marketing pages together using that. But given enough context, AI has the potential to do this much more efficiently and with better results. But as I said, it actually needs that context. I've seen humans create these pages without that context, but they usually have at least some broad general framework of an organization and how it works and its goals. Like even if your organization is bad about making these things explicit, over time as people work there, they start to figure it out. Computers don't just figure it out over time. You have to tell them. Creating these kinds of pages without that context is worse than not having them at all. It has so much potential to be actively harmful to an organization. We've all seen at this point how hallucinations can cause AI to act crazy, and that's not what you want in the central sales pipeline for a product that you're selling. So in conclusion, the things that we're about to talk about are all exciting and interesting, but they don't exist in a vacuum. Systems still need to be designed well. Context is still crucial. Thought and planning need to be brought into every implementation. Technology projects fail all the time without this, and AI is no difference. And I know this talk is about authoring, but all of this stuff is inextricably related. You can't like separate the two, because you can't author good content for AI or using AI without the structure and the context that AI needs. So we've talked about context a lot. So how would we as content strategists and content authors manage it? Well, there's lots of different ways to approach this, but there's a project in the Drupal community that's really interesting that I'm going to talk about. And I think this is something we're going to start seeing in more CMSs as time goes on. And so I thought it was really worth highlighting. So what this is it's a new part of Drupal that's called the Context Control Center. And what it does is it allows you to define different kinds of contexts and select the situations that they apply in. And then anything that hooks into Drupal's AI capabilities will use these contexts as background information or meta information for making decisions. I just want to, for a moment, acknowledge that all of the screenshots you're about to see here come from a blog post by an agency in New Zealand called Bonichi, which I'll link to at the end. I wanted to demo this myself, but I had some issues getting it all working. Like a lot of stuff in this AI space, this is still highly experimental. So I kind of grabbed these screenshots to still be able to demonstrate this because I think it's really cool. So if you look at this example screenshot here, you can see they define some broad overview context about the company and its work, rules for creating landing pages, and general UI, UX, and content guidelines. This is exactly the kind of stuff that the system needs. These are defined as context entities in Drupal speak, but in reality, they're just text files written in Markdown. By the way, speaking of technical skills to pick up, everybody should learn Markdown. I'm not really a fan and think it's kind of dumb, but it's growing wildly as the language of AI for text files, and it's not that hard to learn, so it's worth getting a handle on. So here's an example of one of these files. As you can see, it's a pretty simple description of some general company information. Um, who are we? How do we provide value? It's very simple, but this is the kind of thing that would be great to have someone like us, content people, write, because you're trying to articulate information using plain language in a way that's easy to understand and organized well. I would probably do one that's a little more detailed than this personally, but then you can also write context for things like your style guide, your voice and tone rules, the accessibility requirements that you have for your content, any regulatory requirements you have if you're in a regulatory industry, anything that guides how the system should work with content and the UI. I feel like this is really cool because it provides a place where the people who use the CMS can help to contribute and provide this context. In a lot of cases, I've seen that context hidden away in Git repositories or in code bases where the people who would be the best at writing it can't access it. Putting it here in the CMS where you can give your content people permission to write it and make it known is very cool. And as I said, this is a place where we can provide a lot of value. And this all relates back to authoring, because if you can define this stuff, it means the work that the AI does on the content side is going to be better and much more applicable. And then if you're having problems, you can say, oh, maybe I need to go back and tweak it. And then that can influence the stuff that you have going forward. So that's sort of my sidetrack about context and AI. I think it's a really important topic, and it's not one that I hear enough people talking about. So I decided to talk about it. So having said all of that, once you have all this context in place, let's look at some ways that AI can start to help content authors. And I've kind of divided this into two sections. One is about stuff that's happening inside the CMS, and one side that's happening outside the CMS. So we're going to do the inside part first. So a lot of work in AI and authoring is happening within visual editors like this. I'm sure you've all encountered this kind of interface. It's generally attached to the body or article field in a CMS and offers various formatting options for this field. So for instance, this is a tool called CK Editor, which is integrated into a lot of CMS systems. And it started building AI tools into its premium product. And this is something that I can actually demo, and actually will demo if I can get this over here. There we go. So what I have here is can I get this out of the way? There we go. So what I have here is an article that I wrote a couple of years ago that I've put into CK Editor. And up here, it's got these buttons for enabling CK Editor's AI tools. So if I click this button, it's got different things that you can do. So for instance, you can just get a general chat interface where you ask it questions and get it to review content and stuff like that. But it's also got a lot of pre-built things that you can do. So for instance, one of the things you can do things like improve clarity and readability. So if I click this button, it's going to start going through, and it's basically going to do Grammarly for within your system. And so it's got a lot of suggestions about how you could clarify your text, how you can, and you can jump to those and accept or dismiss them. And it apparently wants me to cut the citation to the quote that I've done. That's not great. I will dismiss that one. But there's a lot of, things that will that it can put together. And again, in the context of an individual CMS, if you've dropped your style guides and your guidelines and voice and tone into it, this will be able to hook into that context and bring them into play for you. So it's not just what Grammarly does, which is sort of generic overall voice and tone adjustment. This is highly customized to your use case. So again, this is another one of those situations where by providing that context, these tools can become much more useful for you. You can also do things like Sorry, I need to get back to my presenter notes to make sure that I'm doing all of the right things. There's also a lot of things that it can do in terms of like, you know, adjust tone and style to a certain thing. It has pre-built, things for that right now. But again, if you were building this into your CMS, it would be extended and tied into your stuff. Um, you could also build accessibility tools into this, and a lot of people are doing that. While we're talking about accessibility, there's been a lot of talk about generating alt text using AI as an accessibility function. I personally find that to be not very compelling. I've done a lot of tests around this, and what you end up seeing is that AI will describe images like saying things like, here's a white building on a hill, because it doesn't have the context of what that building really is. So it can't say, this is the Iowa State Capitol building. I think that some people would argue that the generic alt text is better than nothing. And I'm not sure that I agree, because saying this is a building on a hill adds absolutely nothing to the surrounding text and provides no, information that is helpful to anybody using assistive technologies. And so I'm just not very excited by any of that. So if anybody's talking to you about that, I don't buy it. So this is interesting and cool. Some things about this that are, a word of caution, I would say. This only exists in the context of the editor it lives in. So for instance, if you're doing a more complex content type in which the editor is one field of, say, 20 or 30 fields that surround it, this AI tool is only going to apply to the stuff that's within the editor. Most CMSs, again, are starting to work on things that are more broad, but for this kind of tool, its context is limited to the field in which it lives. And so, this is most useful for things like article content and stuff like that. Something that is really useful here in terms of custom commands is I can say something like generate a summary of this content that is appropriate for use as a meta description. And I think this is actually really cool, because one of the things about meta descriptions or descriptions for listings is that I'm not sure what just happened here. Wow, that did something really weird. Live demos, people. So that was not what was supposed to happen. I wonder what that was all about. So anyways, as far as summarizing content, this is actually a kind of generation that I can kind of get behind, because summarizing content isn't really generating content. It's using the context of the content in order to build something new that a lot of authors have trouble getting their handle on, because a lot of times when you require meta descriptions or things like that as a part of your content management system, what most authors will do is they'll cut the first paragraph or two and dump it into the meta description. And a lot of times that's not very useful, because a meta description is supposed to sort of overview and give, people a way into the content by providing a summary. But a lot of content authors that aren't specifically, built as content people have a big problem with that. So this is the kind of thing where, generating summaries as a part of an AI tool is something that I think is really interesting and that I can get behind. That's how things are being built into these AI tools. And so if we continue to talk about summarizing, then we can take that a step further. So for example, there's a example I'm showing here, which is something that generates specific versions of posts that are optimized for different social networks. Not only will it write concise summaries tied to the needs of those systems, but it'll also recrop photos to specific aspect ratios and the like. Now, this is the kind of drudgery I want AI helping me out with, because anybody who's been in a marketing website in which you're publishing content to different channels knows what a pain it is to generate all these different formats for Blue Sky and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and all of that kind of stuff. And so this is a place where AI has the context of the thing that you've written. It has the context of the different properties that you're publishing to, the different social networks that you're publishing to, and it has the context of the voice and tone and style of your system. And when you put all those things together, it can actually do a pretty decent job. And so this is the kind of thing that I see coming to bear that from a generation standpoint is much more interesting. Um, these are just a couple of examples of where AI is creating a positive experience for authors and strategists that live inside the more traditional authoring interface. A couple of other things that I've seen recently that is interesting is there's a lot of work going on with, for instance, automatically categorizing or organizing content in different ways. That work was initially not something that I saw that was very good, but it has started to get a lot better in the last year. There's a lot of work happening in content governance, doing things like continuously auditing your site to identify duplicate content or identifying duplicate content in real time as you're writing a piece of content. A big problem that I see with a lot of organizations that I work with that have a very large amount of content is that content has a tendency to get duplicated because different departments don't really communicate with each other and know what everybody else is putting together. And so if you can start to detect when multiple pieces of content around the same topic are being created in a way that's more than just like, do they have the same title? That can be really valuable. You can also do not just broken link detection, but sort of broken content detection. Does this content refer to products we don't support anymore? Does it refer to past marketing campaigns that we don't do anymore, et cetera? I actually saw a demo of a new SaaS tool the other day that actually does intelligent regulatory compliance checking and prevents publishing of like flat out prevents the ability to publish content that doesn't comply without it being reviewed and keeps logs off site to keep them from being changed or deleted, which in highly regulated industries is actually really cool. So this is again, a few things that are happening inside the CMS, but I'll be honest, I think the more interesting work is happening outside the CMS using tools that link into the CMS and interact with it. So there's a technology in the AI world called MCP, which I'm not really going to get into, but what it does is it offers a system, a way to communicate the things that it does to an AI client. And then the AI client can read those things and start to make decisions about what it can do and how it can use those things. Getting this to work requires some configuration on the CMS side and your side, but when it's put together, the work is really interesting. And that's the next thing that I am going to demo here. So let me get out again. God, I really hope this goes better than the last one. So what we have here is a tool called Claude. I'm sure that some of you have seen this and are at least somewhat familiar with it. And then what I also have over here is a CMS called Umbraco, which is an open source CMS. And I was worried about that. There we go. Which is an open source CMS that's fairly popular. So in Umbraco here, I have 4 document types or content types. I have an article, an event, a location, and a person. And you can see those up here on the left. And events have a link to locations or people. So in order to create an event, you need to enter a event name, a description, a date, a time, and then you need to create an event and create a location and then come back here and choose the location. In one of my biggest CMS pet peeves, this does not allow you to create the location from within the content that references the location. You have to go and create the location and then come back here and enter it. And it drives me crazy that CMSs still do that. And that's the same for guests because guests link to people. And so you'd also have to go and create a person and come back here and link to it. So for instance, now I would have to say, create a location. And speaking of things that drive me crazy, not allowing you to open a new tab. So you would also have to enter a location name, a phone number, a street address, a city, a state, a zip. So there's a lot of information that you have to go through in order to just create what is here a very simple event from scratch. So what would be much easier is if I could say, create an event in Umbraco for the weekly pinball tournament at Bainbridge Brewing on Wednesday, Feb 25 at 6 o'clock p.m. Now, come on. What is going to happen is that system is going to go out and it is going to look at Umbraco to understand what context structures are available. And look, there's an event content type. So let me figure out its properties. And now I've got that. It wants permission to go in and do some stuff in Umbraco. So it is looking for all the different fields. And now it says the location field is a content picker. Let me see if there's a Bainbridge Brewing location already in the system. There is not. So it's going to go and create it for me. And then no locations exist. So it's got a couple of questions. Do you want me to create a Bainbridge viewing location? Do you want any description event? So I'll say, yes, create the location. Feel free to generate a description for me. So now it's going to go out and do all of that. And the thing that's really interesting to me here is this is just like so natural, right? Like what is happening here is I am just speaking. And a lot of the stuff that comes out in terms of things like formats for dates and times, or the way that you describe addresses, or all of this stuff starts to really just go away. It just starts to become much more natural because we are speaking in the way that we would speak to anybody. And I could just say, "Oh, create this event for next Wednesday," and it would do it. Or I could say, "Create it for the third Wednesday in March," and it would do it. Like I don't have to deal with this date picker and I don't have to go out and find the location. I can just say it. And you'll see that what it's done is it has gone out and found the address for the place where my weekly pinball tournament is and put it in and created the location. I didn't even need to go out and find that myself. And so if I now go into here and look at the content that's been created, I have the weekly pinball tournament. Join us every Wednesday, blah, blah, blah. I think it actually pulled this from the website for the weekly pinball tournaments. It's tied my location into it, and it has created the location and the address for me. The first time that I saw this, I was like blown away because the experience of this is so wildly different than the experience of entering content into a CMS. And I just started like really getting into different situations like this. Like for instance, here's another example. This event, God, I cannot type, happens weekly. Create events for the next 2 months of pinball tournaments. And now what it will just go do is create events all the way through April of all of the tournaments that are coming up. And again, like without me having to go through and say, create document, open it up, click the thing, format the text, make sure the dates are correct, etc. It's just like such a much more, like, I hesitate to say pleasant experience because we're talking about a CMS, but the things that are enabled by using a conversational interface for content creation are super interesting to me. And to me, they kind of represent the first like real leap forward in in content authoring experience since the introduction of the visual editor, honestly. And you can see here, this is already done. And so there's already a whole list of all of these pinball tournaments that's created. And if I go back and look here, then all of that content is there and it's been published. You could also do something like, for instance, for this event, there's a a meetup page that has a description of all of the information for this event. But what if you are running a content strategy or a Seattle website and you want to have all of that information on your website as well? So what I can say is take the information at this URL and create an event based on it. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to go out to meetup.com and it is going to, I didn't think it was going to open a browser. I thought it was just going to do it itself, but sure, go ahead. So it's going to navigate to meetup.com and then it's going to grab all of the page text and then it's going to go out and create an event based on it. And once again, it's going to create the information about the location. It's going to create the information about the guest, because that's one of the things that's a part of this event, and pull it all together and create the event. I will say that sometimes this might be a little slower than doing it yourself might be, but it's certainly more accurate and more sane. And so it has created the event, but what it hasn't done apparently is create the guest, which would be me. And so what I'm going to do is ask it to do that. So there is a guest for this event that didn't get linked. Can you add that information? And I just like love this whole idea of like, oh, this got screwed up. Can you fix it for me? And all of that. Yes, and so now it's going to is saying that it references the people content type, and it's going to go and enter all of that. Oh, that's funny. It found a Greg Dunlap people document in the recycle bin, and it's going to restore it rather than create a new one. I love it. So, that's just some interesting things that are happening when you use a conversational interface. I've got one more example that I think is kind of interesting that I think that everybody here has probably dealt with. So this is still spinning. So a lot of us have probably been involved in content migrations of some site when a website is being migrated from one website to another. And so a lot of times what will happen in these is you'll have a page like this one, which is, the equivalent of your sort of WordPress post, which is a bunch of text on a page that lists all of the locations that somebody might serve. And in your new system, you might have a highly structured location content type. And in order to migrate these two things, what you have to do is copy and paste every single thing on this page into your new system to create your location content types. And if your site is very large, then it might be worthwhile to pay someone to programmatically write that migration. But in many times, if your site is only a few hundred pages, that there's no payoff there. And so what happens is that either the content people at the group that's building this website ends up doing it, or the people at the group having the website built for them ends up doing it. And it's extremely tedious. So what would be much better is if, once again, we could say, take all the locations, oh my God, on this web page and create location content for them. And what it's going to do is go out to this and it's going to analyze the contents of this page, and then it's going to and then it is going to pull out all of the locations and then create location content for them on the other side. And again, from a migration standpoint, this is like the idea that we will be able to do this and have this be so much simple. Like I think about all of the time that I personally have spent doing those, manual migrations, and to be able to, do this stuff so quickly and easily and accurately is really crazy to me. Now, would I want to actually go back and review all of these to make sure that it extracted the information? Absolutely. Absolutely. I would also want to make sure that it actually found everything. But would I much rather do that than do all of this manual migration from scratch? Certainly, certainly. So it has gotten all of the data, it's extracted it, and now it's going to go and create all of these locations. These are really straightforward examples, but I think that they are super interesting, and I kind of see this as the wave of the future for content authoring in a lot of ways. And it raises a lot of questions for me about what does having a CMS even really mean in the future? Like what does having an admin experience really mean even in the future? This is interesting. It has all the data, it's creating all the locations. It is skipping the mobile clinics that have no fixed address. So it's identified that there are some clinics at the bottom here that are mobile clinics that they're not really locations. And so it's actually turning those down. That's actually really smart, honestly. Um, so back to this, it's like it makes me wonder what, like, I spend a lot of time in my book talking about how to create, forms properly and how to design them to reduce, cognitive load and all of this stuff. And it really makes me wonder how much of that stuff is going to be an issue even going forward. Like, do I think that a conversational interface to interact with your CMS will ever be the only way that any of us ever interact with our CMS? Probably not. Do I think it could be the primary way for at least a subclass of content authors? Absolutely. I look at organizations where a lot of the content authors are people who are really just administrative staff or teaching assistants or subject matter experts. And I could see them using an interface like this to get content into a system, while somebody who's more of a content expert uses perhaps a more traditional interface to find it and move it through the process. And for those different use cases, both of them are having their needs met in a much better way now. Another thing that we see here is I'm saying things like create a piece of content of a type, a a location, an event, etc. But one of the things that I spend a lot of time on in CMS implementations is describing content types in a way that authors know what to choose. Because a lot of times, I would never see an author put a blog post into an event content type, but you'd be surprised how many times you see the other way around. Or what's the difference between a blog post or an article or a press release? A lot of times these are very subtle differences, and authors putting the wrong thing into each one can be problematic. Well, what if we kind of like reverse that, right? Rather than an author choosing a content type and putting content into it, what if an author could put a piece of content into the system and have the system analyze that content, and given the context that's provided by the CMS, decide what content type it belongs to? And then you've got a situation where that content is getting into the right place much more accurately. Like the authors may not even know that content types exist. And I think there are some ways in which that's a bummer, and in some ways in which it's an incredible boon to the creation of content for an organization. And I think this could be a huge boon in many ways. And so this conversational interface for interacting with content systems is something that I'm really excited about And I can't wait to see where it all goes, because there's a lot of stuff moving into conversational interfaces, and this is just, one of many examples. So, in conclusion, conversational interface, as I said, is legitimately the most exciting and impressive thing that I've seen in a long time. I think it's more intuitive, it's more accessible, certainly, and it's easier to understand. And as I say, these tools are in their infancy, but they're only going to get better, both inside and outside of the CMS. Like the amount of change and growth in just the last 6 months has been absolutely incredible. And I understand that there's a lot to say about the way that AI is being pitched and implemented at organizations across the world right now. And I think that, we can all be honest that there's probably a lot more bad than good happening. And it's very hard, very easy. And I know because I experienced it, to have a sort of knee-jerk reaction to all of the horrible marketing and quote unquote thought leadership happening about AI right now. But that doesn't mean these tools are not useful and can't be brought to bear on problems that we have every day in order to improve the lives of not just the content authors and the organizations who have created the content or need the content, but also the people who are using the content who will get it in a better way. And so that's my talk about AI and content authoring. And I would be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody.
That's great. Thanks, Greg. We do have some questions, and Ariel's going to queue those up.
Yeah. The first one is regarding when you went into Claude,
Mhm.
Claude Code, and Claude Cowork. The person who asked is named Jen, and she asked, she's been using the terminal, but what you were using looks much nicer. She's curious how you got there.
Oh yeah, so Claude has a terminal interface, the UI, but it also has a desktop application which you can download from the website, and that's what I was using.
And that's what you
Claude, yeah, Claude for desktop.
okay.
And one of the nice things about Claude for desktop here, I can pull it open. Oh, I'm not sharing anymore. But one of the things that it does is it allows you to create what are called projects, and projects have context that live with them. And so, anyone who's used AI for a while understands that when you're in a long conversation, there's a memory window. And as you start to go farther in that conversation, the memory window kind of follows you, and the stuff that's at the beginning starts to get lost. And
Mhm.
projects can help to manage that by keeping a lot of the context of a conversation in the same place. And so I actually really like Claude. And actually the stuff that I was showing is using Claude Code specifically, which is sort of the more advanced model that I find even for non-coding or analytical applications is better for most things.
Awesome. Cool. I actually just downloaded the desktop app for Claude today. I'm excited to check it out. Paula, correct me if I get this wrong, but with regard to the conversational interface, Paula was curious if it connects to any CMS or was it an Umbraco integration?
So what there is a standard called MCP, as I mentioned before,
Right.
and you build an implementation of that standard into your CMS. So almost all CMSs are in the process of or have already built MCP integrations into their systems. And so this was one that I had gotten working a while ago, and I had it locally, so I used it. But I know like Drupal's working on an MCP server and like I know Contentful has an MCP server and all of
Okay.
this stuff. So functionally, it is something that is or will soon be available in almost every system. Um, Whether it's turned on and available and configured in your specific CMS installation is a completely different matter. But
Yeah.
some coordination with your technical people and stuff like that could help to clear the way for things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, so everyone, ask your ask your technical team to whether or not you can integrate or implement the MCP server in your CMS. You want to be able to do this magic.
Magic. Yes, we want the magic. Um, let's see, Justina asked, they mentioned that this overall makes sense to me when it comes to structured content types, but for more fluid content blocks, tone issues take over. Have you found any tools that aren't terrible at adapting content for style, voice, and tone?
Well, as I say, I think the important thing is to establish that style, voice, and tone into the context of your CMS
Hmm.
somewhere,
Hmm.
so that when you are writing, that CMS can start to apply it and alert you when you're not writing in the right way. And there are very, I showed how that integrates with something like CK Editor. Different CMSs are working on this in different ways. So, for instance, in Drupal, one of the reasons that the context control center that I showed is so important is because they're establishing an enormous amount of work into creating marketing landing pages. And they understand that those pages don't work if they don't understand your marketing. And so, and your voice and tone and your style and all of those things. And so that's one of the reasons why they've, established that. But I don't think it's about the tools as much as it is about providing the AI with the information that it needs in order
Hmm.
to understand the content that it's using and the content that you're providing it and what it needs to look like.
Right. And of course, contexts are a good old
Yeah.
pal, context.
And
Yes.
so, if I look at the conversational interface, you could very easily. I had another demo that I ended up not doing, but it was, take a Word document and upload it into Claude and have it create an article out of it. And it does that actually very well. And when it does it, it creates it actually turns the Word document into semantic headings
Ah,
and bullets and, all of that stuff. And then ideally, if your CMS is set up with it, it could also take that and apply your style guide to it at the same time. And so it's less about the tools and more about like what's being provided on the other
super
Yeah.
useful. That's
end.
awesome.
I,
We have a couple of folks. Oh, Paula, go ahead.
oh, sorry. I have another question. So you mentioned early on that a good skill for all of us to learn is Markdown. Um, can you just elaborate that on that a little bit more and how that kind of fits into this picture of in what you were showing with the, the editor interfaces and the CMS?
Yeah, so just to back up a little bit, Markdown is a method of writing text and integrating some level of semantic information into it by identifying things like this is a header, this is a header one, this is a header two, this is a header three, this is a bulleted list, etc. Um, in a very simple way that's much simpler than doing it in, say, HTML. And so, for instance, a hash before a line of text indicates a header one, two hashes indicates a header two, etc. Um, and Markdown has kind of become the de facto language of communicating with the tools like Claude. So, for instance, one of the things that you can do in Claude is say, oh, here's some information about me and how I work, and the work that I do, and then it can use that as context when it has more conversations, and you provide that information in Markdown, or it converts the information that you give it to Markdown. And so being able to read and provide Markdown is, a skill set that's something that, is useful. I know also that a lot of people who have Markdown built into their CMSs as well. I've seen that happening more and more frequently recently. And so, and Markdown is very straightforward. So it is something that's pretty easy to pick up. And there's lots of, if you just Google guide to learning Markdown, there's, 100 websites for it.
Got it. Awesome. I think, let's see, quick question from Marcia. What does MCP stand for?
Um, Model context protocol, I think.
Okay. Sounds reasonable.
Yeah. Well, Vinay
Yeah,
answered
because
that in the chat. Yeah.
Model
yeah,
context
another
protocol.
it's
Oh,
like
Vinay
because
answered it. There it
yeah.
is. Thank you, Vinay.
Because
Awesome.
it's another way to provide context. So the CMS provides the context of the things that it can do and the tools that it provides to AI, and that's context that AI uses to make decisions about what's available. Yeah.
Always love hearing that part. Um, Kate is curious, what is your experience conveying ROI to people with the purse strings? So it's obvious to us as practitioners, but she wonders what the numbers would be, what numbers would be most persuasive for budgets and budget people.
The nice, if you can call it that, thing about AI right now is it doesn't take a lot of convincing for people to do stuff with it these days. Because if you can say like, oh, if you give me this tool, I can do our migration 80% faster than before, people are going to sign the check. And so it's an interesting experience for us as content people because we are used to trying to justify things that are more expensive, that take more time, that take more energy, that extend timelines. And this is like the opposite. Like we can find stuff that will make us more efficient for the stuff that we don't want to do, right? Like, we hear a lot about making it more efficient for the do stuff we do want to do, but let's like find ways to make it more efficient to find the stuff that we don't want to do. And if we can bring that efficiency to bear and communicate it, then people are going to be interested. And I think that one of the things that it will take is for all of us to become educated about the tools and the way in which we want to use them. Because the thing that is not going to change is that we are going to have to advocate for ourselves and our needs to our organizations and the people who hold the purse strings, which is something that we've all had to, live with and be a part of for our entire professional lives. And so, but I think it'll be easier because again, we can find savings here rather than costing people money. And if we can drive that conversation, then we can put it into a place where we can get efficiency in the way that benefits us, as opposed to ways to create efficiency that the organization is reading about on LinkedIn, which is going to be replacing us with bots that are going to create content that's crappier than what we would do.
Yeah. That's awesome. We have a couple of folks who just are saying, thank you, very insightful presentation. I definitely agree. I think Vinay wanted to know just a little bit more about what AI tools you're using as part of your content strategy creation / review workflows, and what might have made you say, wow, and what do you still look for?
I continue to be very impressed by Claude Code for lots of things. Some things, but there are some things that I really want to do that I haven't had a chance to. One thing, for instance, I've done very small experiments around it, but one of the things I've been playing with is the classification of broad sets of unknown content. As an example, let's say that you go to a government agency and they've got 1,000 PDFs sitting on their server and they want to convert them all to web pages. Now, what are all of these PDFs, right? Because they all need to be, you need to look at them, see what they are, figure out, how many of these are regulatory proceedings that we need a new content type for, and how many of these are just random crap that we don't need to convert at all, or how many of these things are similar things with different displays that we'll have to manage by hand. And what I was able to do in a small scale, I'll be interested to see how it happens at a large scale, is to say, scan all of these PDFs, identify the ones that are structurally similar, and then describe that structure to me and group them together so that I can review the ones that don't meet any kind of structure. And it actually did that fairly impressively. Like there was a group of ones that are like reports as a result of meeting minutes for this specific type of meeting. And they were very tightly formatted. And I was like, those are all kind of the same. And then there was one like, it was like, form applications for licensing of some sort, right? And they all had the same information in it, and that information had to be available to the public so that people could look up who is licensed for different things. And I was like, I could very easily now design a content type based on this and shove all of this into it and have it all get created, and it would all happen very quickly, actually, because the PDFs were all very much the same. But for me to go through and classify them all myself by hand would have taken an enormous amount of time, especially when, they're not named consistently, they're not in the same location, they're all shoved into one folder, and they're all over the place, which is very often the case. The problem with that is that analyzing that amount of content is an enormous amount of overhead. And for the AI tools that are available now is expensive. It's less expensive than hiring me to do it by hand, but it's more expensive than I want to pay for testing and experimenting. And so, that's the kind of thing where I'm hopeful that at my, next position, I'll be, able to start to work on some of those things at a larger scale than I've been able to by having them funded by clients or the organization. And then another thing that I'm really interested in is bringing that to bear on content inventories at a large scale too. So for instance, when I did a project for the state of Georgia some years ago, I did a gigantic content or inventory of every piece of content on all 120 of their state agencies. And it was like, over 500,000 lines in a spreadsheet. And some of the stuff that I wanted to do was break it out into content by agency, content by type, content of a different specific topic, find out how the content kind of weaved across agencies and how it was isolated and all different kinds of things. And I did all of that, but it was either it was very manual or it was me writing a lot of code to do it myself. And I think there's a lot that can be brought to bear on those sort of situations a lot more easily from an AI standpoint, both from a content and a design system analysis. Because another thing that we often do is we say, oh, here are the 4 kinds of components that you use across all of the government agencies. But then that again is a manual process of you going and looking through the sites and identifying the components and documenting them and stuff like that. So those are the places. Anything that has to happen with content at scale, I think is very interesting. And there's a lot of opportunity to, again, just like take the 20% of drudge work off the top.
It's almost like you've just described the project that I'm working on. Not quite 500,000 pages, but the trying to identify content types for one thing, and doing inventories. And what I found with the content types, and this was just using just kind of out of the box, ChatGPT and Claude.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it, I ran the same queries on both just to sort of see what the differences were and which was more accurate. And it was actually kind of interesting that ChatGPT did a better job of it, but it was definitely a good example of the importance of how you write your prompts and
sure.
what you tell it to look for. Because
Mm-hmm.
in this case, these were web pages. There was a lot, it wasn't. So in some ways, there'd be a lot of clues just in things like the URLs and the names, things that were clearly product pages or whatever. But nonetheless, trying to identify the types, and I wanted it to also, I tried to also get a report that would tell me the frequency and the types of like the components on the page, right? So how many of these pages contain something like use cases or whatever, right? What I was coming across with that is that works if everything on the site, every time there's a use case, it's labeled a use case, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So it was a good experiment and a good. I mean, it was helpful, but I mean, it was definitely an education in how to really how to prepare and how to write the prompts, but also the importance of reviewing the output and being able to say, no, this isn't correct, but you got me 60% of the way there or 75% of the way there. Yeah.
When I try to sell content, structured content into different organizations, that's often one of the things that I bring up is that when you want to move to a new CMS and when you want to redesign in 5 years, you're going to want to know what all of this stuff is because your migration is going to be way harder if you don't, for exactly the reasons that you're describing.
Yeah. I'm really curious about the migration opportunities. I mean, I think that, as you're saying, that could be huge. So
yeah, I agree.
Very excited. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, obviously something we could probably just geek out about for hours, but we are at almost 7:15. I think lots of people are are heading off to dinner or whatever. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you, Greg. Super interesting presentation. Reminder, we will have the video up on our YouTube channel. We'll announce that on all of those various channels we mentioned before. And keep an eye again for our upcoming events in the next few months. We hope to see you again. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for coming. I know that was probably a little more like, I don't know, a little less tight than a lot of the presentations are.
That was great,
But
though.
you know, I hope it came off well.
Super. No, it was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much
Thanks.
for,
Thank you.
for joining
All
and
right.
sharing, Greg. And
Yeah,
thanks,
bye.
Paula and Tony. We'll see you, the rest of you soon.
Good night, all.